Ready, sir?
Yes, sir. Good evening. Welcome to the Township of Abington's Board of Commissioners revised zoning ordinance update for March 13, 2017. And may I have a roll call, please?
Yes. Sapone? Here. Spiegelman?
Here.
Sanchez?
Here.
Rothman?
Here.
Myers?
Here.
Markman? Lori Schreiber?
Here.
Bowman?
Here.
DiPlacido? Barron? Gillespie?
Here.
Ecker, thank you for being there. Ecker? Kalinowski? I thought I saw him. Mr. Klein?
Here.
And Luker. Mr.
Here.
President. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Kalinowski is here, and I believe Commissioner DiPlacido and Commissioner Farron have some problems getting here from their places of employment.
They're okay. Thank you.
Thank you. So at this time, I'd like to call on Vice President Stephen Klein of our Board of Commissioners for our first presentation.
Thank you, President Luker. So this evening, we're going to review the revisions that have been made to the zoning ordinance, the rewriting of our zoning ordinance for the township. So we will not be looking for a vote this evening, as we are going to explain later on in the presentation. There are additional edits that have come since the 2016 version that we've discussed with the solicitor. We've also gotten some comments back through the Township Code Enforcement Department. But we're going to go through most of the information, bring you up to date, and then we'll have to actually set up another date for consideration of what we would call the 2017 version. So bring up to you first that we had, so I'm going to bring you some chronological background. So draft one was completed in 2013. From 2013, we went out and did 4 community meetings. We had them in 4 different locations. Obviously, Township Building was one, Roslyn, McKinley, and Edge Hill Firehouse, or Roslyn Elementary School, McKinley School, and Edge Hill Firehouse. And you can see the dates up there. They were all done in the early part of 2014. Then we had some additional, more specific meetings which dealt with the transition overlay district, or that was part of the original draft one. Those concentrated in Ward 11, which was in April of 2014, and a combined meeting which dealt with Wards 3 and 12, and that was in May of 2014. Subsequently, the transition overlay, as a result of those meetings, was taken out of the zoning ordinance. We came up with what we called Draft 2, and then we started the vetting process through the Planning Commission, and we ended up having 6 meetings with the Abington Township Planning Commission. And as you can see, those started at the end of 2014 and went till the end of March 2015. At which time, in March 24th, 2015, the Abington Township Board of Commissioners voted on a list of recommendations which was passed along to the full Board of Commissioners for consideration of being adopted. Then on October 19th of 2015, we had a review meeting with the Board of Commissioners, and we went through the list of recommended changes that was passed passed along by the Abington Township Planning Commission, and the Board of Commissioners adopted that list, and that list was then given back to the Zoning Ordinance Committee, which then went through and started making revisions to Draft 2. So that's where we are now. The ordinance that was advertised for this evening was labeled 2016 version, which would basically be Draft 3 or 4, depending on how you want to look at it. And the 2016 version, in a sense, took those recommended changes from the Planning Commission and the Board of Commissioners, which were adopted in 2015, and the Zoning Ordinance Committee went through each of those items on the list and made the appropriate changes or had the appropriate discussions as to whether those changes would be incorporated in the next version. So I'm going to quickly go through. So in the beginning, we started with a plan for a range of density and intensities. We really concentrated on our commercial districts. We also looked at some of the language of our residential districts, R1 through R4. looked at reconfigured districts according, work expanded on the comp plan. We analyzed the comp plan. We also looked at some of our business district revitalization plans. And then I guess it's fair to say, step back a second, the Zoning Ordinance Committee was made up of members of the Board of Commissioners, staff, the members of the Planning Commission, members of the Zoning Hearing Board, members of the Economic Development Council. There were members from the Environmental Advisory Council, and I think at times the Shade Tree Commission. And then we also had some just citizens at large that were also on the committee. The committee was, I think at a height, was probably about 16, 17, 18 people large. And then on top of that, we also had our planner from Montgomery County Planning Commission. So our initial work did a lot of analysis of plans, looking at the township, the existing zoning. We started investigating the idea of form-based zoning, which has been something that has been considered in other municipalities, and we looked at different ideas of form-based zoning, which really form-based zoning concentrates more on the use and how it fits on the site, as opposed to just purely regulations based on only the use and where it's located in the township. And form-based zoning looked more at what was happening around the property as opposed to what was preconceived to be in that property. So we looked at different ideas in form-based zoning, and we came up with the idea of doing more of a hybrid zoning idea. We looked at some of our commercial districts, and we started to figure out how we can incorporate some of the ideas of form-based zoning into our existing commercial districts, because we also had to consider the fact that that the township, and we've used this number before plenty of times, that the township is 98% built out. So the idea of form-based zoning working within undeveloped property is slim to none in the township. So we did some extensive. We looked at the extensive design considerations for our village areas, mainly the Keswick Village and the Roslyn Main Street District. New development to respect traditional town character. We started looking at the streetscapes, we started looking at the building stock, and we started looking at the revitalization plans for both of those areas. We knew that we wanted to do more of promoting walkability in our commercial districts, not just in the village areas, but also the small commercial districts, as you see in Ardsley, see in the McKinley area, you see around north end of Easton Road, and you have other spatterings throughout the township, but we started looking at how to create more of a walkable community. We also looked at architectural detailing and how to incorporate some of those general provisions into the ordinance. We began to survey all the different properties within our commercial districts. We started analyzing them for walkability, transportation support, both on public transportation and vehicular transportation. We looked at streetscape standards based on some of, once again, those revitalization plans that the township has done in various commercial areas. We looked at a mixture of uses. We analyzed what the mixture of uses were existing. We analyzed which one of those uses had the possibility of being utilized in the future and how these properties might develop in the future. And we started to decide whether the uses that were characterized in the 1996 ordinance had some relevance in today's landscape. Then we started looking at how commercial districts, how they relate to the streets and how they relate to the pedestrians. We started looking at different ideas. You see here what we have is what we call street wall. We tried to start to look at bringing the buildings closer to the sidewalk and making it more pedestrian friendly and de-emphasizing the parking areas, or giving incentives to de-emphasize the parking areas. We also gave flexibility to the developers with a bonus system that we explored in the Fairway Transit District that's used for the Baderwood section. We started looking at using those same type of bonuses, which would give something back to the township in the way of shared parking agreements, reducing curb cuts on streets, some green construction like green roofs and stormwater and upgrades to stormwater management. Those would also reap benefits to the developer in the sense of bonus, in the sense of density bonuses or square footage bonuses. We also asked for, as bonuses, we looked at civic spaces, and once again, shared parking. We wanted to see if we would give bonuses out in development rights if the developer would come back with more civic spaces. And then also if they met certain standards within architectural detailing and architectural context around them. Recently, we've looked at sign. We had to analyze our sign and billboard ordinance from the 2016 version, which was advertised, to the version that we're currently looking at now. We revised our sign and billboard ordinance, and Mark will be going over that in a little more detail. But the sign ordinance now will conforming with legal considerations in advice from our solicitor. It addresses digital signs, and we also used a portion of the Montgomery County Planning Commission's model sign ordinance. Once again, going back to the bonuses, various ways to develop and attain bonuses encourage amenities that desired by the township and provide flexibility to the developer to choose which will make the point system, and they'll gain from that. We also looked at our residential districts. We incorporated a few minor items, but something we felt was important. Most of our development in our residential districts would consist of what we call infill development, and we started to write some rules about infill development. And infill development would be where somebody might have a double lot, and they subdivide that lot off, and they sell it or they develop it with a new house. And sometimes those houses stick out like a sore thumb. So we developed some regulations that would require them to stay within a certain distance away from the street, comparison to the houses to either side, the same ratios of glass, of windows to the facade, total square footage, to try to get some continuity so that the houses don't look like they look like sore thumbs on the street. We also incorporated what we've dubbed the accessory dwelling units, which would allow for aging relatives and even younger children that come back from college and looking for a place to live to be able to live in their own separate space, but not necessarily within the main part of the house. And we wrote rules for accessory dwelling units, which most people would classify as in-law suites. But we actually make them more restrictive to where they have to be registered, and they also can only be used for family members, and that's also noted in the ordinance. The new code makes what we feel is a little bit more user-friendly. When you go through the charts, the use charts and also the district dimensional charts, we tried to make them color-coded and within the binder of the ordinance so that people can easily get back and forth between the areas. We tried to put all the information for the actual district within the district requirements instead of having to flip back and forth to different sections to find it like you have to do in the 1996 ordinance. With the way the County Planning Commission is put together, the actual codifying of the ordinance, it will allow us to be easier connection to the web and be a web-based ordinance that people can easily refer to. Once again, color tabs, fewer redundancies and contradictions that we've identified early on in the process, and greater use of explanatory illustrations. You'll see that there's illustrations throughout the entire ordinance which kind of give you an idea of what the intent was. Along the way, we started to also identify things that were in the existing ordinance that needed to be taken out and be incorporated more in the subdivision and land development ordinance, which is a separate actual document that the township uses for land development and subdivisions. There are certain things that were in the existing ordinance that were better tasked to be in the subdivision and land development ordinance. And we also, through our discussion, started to identify those items that needed to be edited and changed along the way with the experience of Mark and Larry on going through those processes and those things that needed to be changed. And that will be part of the next process for the township, which is to update the saldo. And those would include landscape and riparian buffer protections. So that brings me to the end of my presentation. The next step would be to have Michael come up and go through the recommendation list that was developed back in October of 2015 that the Zoning Ordinance Committee worked off of.
Thank you, Commissioner Vice President Klein. And when you say Michael, you're referring to Michael Narkowicz,
Yes.
Principal Planner of the Montgomery County Planning Commission. Is that correct, sir?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Stephen. Before you get started, for the record, Larry.
Yes, sir.
Please note that Commissioner Hecker, Farron, and DePlacido were all excused. That
Thank
was
you.
my error at the beginning of the
I
meeting.
appreciate
Thank
that.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Narkowicz, it's yours.
Okay, thank you. Excuse me? I just need to, it should just take a second to open this.
Okay, good point. Are there any questions of commissioners? Mr. Mateo?
Sir, I was just going to ask, you mentioned everybody but Mr. Markman. Was Mr. Markman excused also?
No, I have no record of Mr. Martin.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for
Appreciate that.
clarification.
No
That was my
problem.
error, sir. At this point, Mr. Klein, Commissioner Klein, are you taking comments from the audience at this point? Or why don't we stop and ask, why don't we do that at this point before we go any further? Are there any comments from residents in the audience?
And I was just going to mention that some questions might be answered through the
Okay.
slides as we go through, but
Okay, why don't we do that then? Mr. Narkowicz, you can proceed then.
Okay, thank you. So I'll run through the memo that summarizes the changes made to the zoning ordinance, or the changes that were discussed in response to the Board of Commissioners' recommendations, which considered the recommendations in turn of the Planning Commission. So zoning map changes, first of all, lots were rezoned on Shady Lane from recreation conservation to R4 high-density single-family, and that's just recognizing that there are single-family homes there now. The zoning for Ardsley Wildlife Sanctuary was changed from R4 to CS, and St. John's Church from R4 to CS, and that just recognizes that those are institutional uses, and they're typically zoned in the community service district and have regulations appropriate to that type of use there. We updated definitions based on the most recent standards. Drop-off containers for recycling or resale of clothing. Those are now not permitted within the front yard area, and they now require a medium-intensity screen. Outdoor dining, the tables and chairs are required to be taken indoors or secured each night. Outdoor recreational uses, such as playgrounds, there's a recommendation to make this permitted within commercial districts for things like small play areas at fast food restaurants and other recreational facilities. Parking garages and decks, you wanted to eliminate the requirement for them to be set back from buildings, and this just allows more denser development and a better opportunity for redevelopment. And carryouts, restaurants did not have a provision for carryout services in the same use, so that was changed. Bars and taverns, in the past, there was a provision that they had to be 500 feet apart. So for areas where you actually have some entertainment and you have a little restaurant district or bars and so forth, they often tend to group together, so that didn't make very much sense. So that was eliminated. With rental vehicles, there was a 90-day limitation on those, and it didn't seem logical to keep that, so that was eliminated. Fracking, the solicitor is being consulted on that. Bike shares, there was a recommendation to add zoning provisions for these bike shares, although after the staff discussed it, it was felt that a specific zoning provision would not be necessary. They could be allowed through the standard interpretation of the code. Zoning district names, there's a question about the building code, because the building code references specific zoning districts from the previous code. And so when we update the zoning ordinance, should it get enacted, the zoning district names would change. And so it just needs to be determined if how that relates to the building code, whether they have to be changed in there or not. Okay, so the solicitor's been consulted on that. Seasonal farmers markets, these were made a conditional use within the community service district. Green space in the MSH district, the Main Street High Intensity Density District, the minimum requirement for green space was increased. For signs, and Mark Penikel will be talking about this a bit later, but there was the recommendation to make all temporary signage treated equally, consistent with legal decisions and the evolving way of treating temporary signage. And so they have now been made much more consistent. As Stephen alluded to, the county model has been used to inform the sign ordinance revisions and updates. With billboards, there were certain stipulations for those as part of providing for those, maximum height, setbacks, and so forth, and those were all created. And LED digital signs are permitted on the billboards. Let me just get back up here. The political signs have now been addressed after consulting with the solicitor. The Recreation Conservation District, there was just a typo there, so we removed that. We defined a term in the Floodplain Conservation District, bankful flow, and that's essentially right when a water body reaches flood stage and is about to spill over into the floodplain. ADU parking, that was changed to 1 required parking space per accessory dwelling unit. So regardless of the number of drivers, and in some cases, frankly, there may not be any licensed drivers anymore, but nonetheless, to keep it simple, it's going to be 1 per unit. Buffers, we reviewed some of the options for vegetative and fence buffers and clarified that. Okay, with tree replacement, there were some revisions made here and requirements for new trees being planted when trees were removed. We had long conversations about these. With the tree plantings list, in the landscaping chapter, this now includes a reference to the tree plantings list from the Saldo memo. So, again, I think Stephen mentioned this, but when you change the zoning, it necessitates changes to the subdivision and land development ordinance so they're consistent. Furthermore, we felt that it was appropriate to move some of the things that have previously been in zoning to the subdivision and land development ordinance, because in the subdivision and land development ordinance, you can waive things, and there's more flexibility in the land development process. Okay. In the tree canopy, we just added a definition to that. We deleted the permit requirement for tree removal. There's a whole new chapter on alternative energy. So we now regulate things like wind turbines, anaerobic digesters, geothermal power, and there's a recommendation to look at a minimum separation distance for the wind turbines. So we did do that, and it would be based on the distance from a site to a property with a wind turbine. And so essentially it's going to be at least the height of the structure itself. Turbines shall not be allowed closer to a property than its total extended height. You can see the regulations in there too. So we now have 2 property line setbacks, and it depends on whether the adjacent use is residential or not. So farther setback for residential. Okay, so we consulted the solicitor on financial subdivisions. For outdoor storage and display of goods and materials, we checked with Ordinance 2093 just to ensure consistency. Gas pump video display signs, that's another example of new technology that didn't exist or wasn't commonly used didn't exist when the last ordinance was written in 1996. So we now regulate those. We do permit them without a permit, but we have a maximum size, 3 square feet per gas pump. The massage ordinance requirements were consolidated with the adult use regulations. The suggestion was made to replace the illustration. Okay, we updated illustrations too to include Abington illustrations. In the Main Street districts, there was a reference to a hedge, and we took those out. So the street wall that Stephen was referring to earlier can can consist of a decorative wrought iron fence along with some low-level shrubbery and decorative trees and things like that, or a decorative low brick wall, very low brick wall. But we took the hedge out because there was concern about maintenance and the problem, how that might become problematic at times, as well as catching litter on the streets. We added a bonus in the Main Street districts for a green roof. In the business center districts, those are the shopping center districts. They're currently the PB plan business ones. We just tighten up the language, and we're careful with the way we refer to using the term shall versus should. There was a contradiction in the regulations for maximum impervious coverage and minimum green area in the triangle area, which is down at Noble Town Center, right next to the Noble train station. That's an area where we're encouraging transit-oriented development. So we just made that, made the two criteria work together consistently. We also added a buffering requirement so that if development does occur there, it takes into consideration the existing residential homes across the other side of the railroad track. Sometimes in regulations you'll see that a railroad track itself will be considered an adequate buffer, but frankly it doesn't affect the view. It's still, there's still a visual incursion, if you will, when a new development's built and there's a residential use right across the track, because you can still see it very easily. So now there is a requirement for some vegetative or other buffer. Okay. There's a question about elevation and flood proofing requirements, whether we could remove certain sections. It was determined they could not be removed. They're important to keep. In the LPO, land preservation overlay, minimum required open space was made consistent, so it's minimum required open space 50%, regardless of the dwelling type. We cleaned up the dimensional table there, just to add a note. We just added an amendments placeholder, so when new amendments are added to the zoning ordinance, that can go at the end without messing up the pagination. The appendix and the comprehensive use matrix, accessory dwelling units were made a special exception. So the zoning hearing board has some extra control and review of proposals for creating those. Okay. There was an old requirement for a restaurant to be in a mixed-use building in the SI district, and changes have occurred, so that is not the way that the planning consensus is moving. So we changed the ordinance to reflect that, so you can't have freestanding restaurants. We clarified with drive-throughs that we have drive-throughs in the Main Street Village Center District, but only for non-restaurant retail uses. So you can have them for something like a pharmacy, for example, but not for restaurants. And the MSVC, again, is the Roslyn and Keswick areas. We're most concerned about having a high level of basic design requirements. Okay. Signs were formally prohibited from the right-of-way, and that had to be eliminated. There's a recommendation to remove political signs or require their removal after 7 days, after 7 days after an election or what have you. But due to legal considerations, we were forced to not add that requirement. It would have been too stringent. Parking for apartments and condominiums, we changed it to, let's see, 1.33 spaces for apartment or condominium use, regardless of the number of bedrooms, and 2 spaces per townhouse unit. There was a section on the stumps of trees and their removal. Sorry, let me go back up here. And the recommendation was they should be removed a minimum 4 inches below grade, and change that to stumps not visible from a public street or abutting property. Okay. The street wall specs were in a couple places, so we just eliminated them from one of the chapters and kept them, we eliminated them from landscaping and kept them in the streetscape chapter. Street tree regulations, they appeared in both landscaping and sidewalk and streetscapes. We did the same with those. We just kept them in one chapter. Planters, there's requirement in certain areas for them to be at least every 50 feet. We made that change. The administration and permits chapter of the zoning ordinance had a reference, sort of an extraneous orphan reference to suits for injunctions and civil proceedings, but it didn't actually correspond to anything in the administration section, so we eliminated that. Brew pubs and distilleries are another one of those new uses that are increasingly regulated and provided for. And of course, you've had one, while we've been writing this, come into Huntington Valley Shopping Center. And so we did provide for that use. We created use regulations for them and provided for them in the BC, again, the shopping center areas, the suburban industrial and the Main Street districts. Street classifications, we changed the references from the county classification to the townships. So that now refers to the township saldo. Okay, and there's a recommendation about preparing a stormwater ordinance that was done separately. So the zoning refers to that ordinance. There were updates for the change in requirement for land development applications for reuse of buildings over 50,000 square feet. So essentially, there were changes made to encourage redevelopment of some of these older buildings. The co-location of wireless communications equipment, that's something that will be addressed at a later date. And that concludes the memo.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, Michael, thank you. Next, we'll have Mark Pennical.
Questions?
Sorry,
Can we take-
Commissioner
can we take-
Myers, yes.
Michael, you had, earlier in the presentation, you had mentioned outdoor dining, and I wasn't sure if this is what is proposed or existing, that you have to remove the tables and chairs at night. Is that,
It's proposed.
would that also be for restaurants that have actually entirely enclosed areas?
I would need to look up the actual text of that. Let me just.
I know it said secure. It said removed or secured.
Or secure?
Yeah,
Well, is it?
if we're talking like a Cheesecake Factory that has a defined location where they store all their tables and chairs, then I would tell you no, it's already under roof.
No, and actually, I'm speaking I'm thinking very specifically, like Mad Mex, who has a patio with a high wall. You can't even see the outdoor dining. I can't imagine that they have to bring that furniture in.
I don't think that furniture is capable of being brought in.
Well, I don't know the weight of it, but let's just, for argument's sake, would they be required to bring in the furniture if it's completely enclosed from any exit?
I would think when we discuss this, maybe we want to talk about the enclosure itself in a secured area, maybe is the way to phrase it, instead of just, where our thought pattern was as you go down Keswick Avenue or 2 or 3 of the locations in Roslyn where they have tables right out on the sidewalk, and there's no separation between the tables and the curb line. Those were the types of situations we were looking to address.
And I certainly understand that, but I think that we really do need to differentiate, because there are a lot of restaurants that build a specific area and an enclosed area.
Right, so maybe the key would be is if it's already enclosed by a permanent structure such as a wall.
The mic, Michael.
Oh, sorry.
I'll use the mic.
Yeah. So maybe the key would be to, and I think you agree with this, like if there's a permanent structure such as a wall enclosing it so that chairs and tables couldn't be blown by the wind out into the street and cause a hazard, that could be regulated separately, and that would be okay. And likewise, if there was furniture that was not likely to be moved by the wind because it's so heavy or it's fixed to the ground, then similarly, you would also not need to take that inside.
Okay, well, I think that's a needed addition.
Okay. Yes, I'll make a note of that.
Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Commissioner Gillespie, and then
Yeah.
Commissioner Sanchez.
I also have a question on that, and I know, Mark, you know Keswick Avenue does have two, well, Keswick and then down to where Standard used to be. They have fence. Is that sufficient?
They have what, Commissioner?
They have fence, they have a railing.
Enclosure.
That
Enclosure,
was
but
the-
it's not a wall, so I'm just wondering.
Conversation, I mean, I think the way to phrase it is a secured area.
Yeah.
Okay.
That way, we're not bannering over, is it a wall, is it a fence?
street, that type of thing.
The accessory use group A17 does not specifically talk about enclosed areas like Commissioner Myers was talking about at Max.
Stephen, could you speak into the mic?
The accessory use group A17, which is outdoor dining, talks about securing it, but does not talk about specific exceptions for when the outdoor dining is in a enclosed area like we talked about at Max or down at Cheesecake Factory. So we can look at adding that for the next
Okay.
Okay, good. Commissioner Gillespie?
Outside.
That
That's
good?
good. We like to eat outside when we can.
Okay. Commissioner
The
Sanchez?
intention of that portion
Hold
of
on.
the ordinance was purely, I think, from what I remember, the conversations from the zoning ordinance committee was not to pick on anybody, but out on Keswick, you have a couple of places where they just have a couple of tables and chairs, and we didn't want those left out without being secured at the end of the night.
Yeah.
Right.
I think that was the intention of the terminology. Probably should go a little bit further about areas that are actually enclosed.
To some extent. Okay, great.
Okay. Commissioner Sanchez?
Thank you, Mr. President. Mike, did you say number 20 on your list regarding the tree replacement? Do you have that handy still?
Yeah, let me pull that up again there. Okay, yes, I'm just pulling that up here, Commissioner. Okay. And what was your question?
So does that, this is like the tree replacement, when you add 500 square feet of impervious coverage, is that going to be in this, I'm confused, was that going to be in the SAL, did you mention, or that's?
This will be in zoning, and if you see the reference at the end there, 2401, that's where the change was made. The subheadings, preservation and protection of existing vegetation.
I see, thank you. Now, and then the permit requirement was suggested to be, so if you
Yeah,
were
so
to
there's no
remove a
permit
tree,
involved, right.
so long as you replace, that's the, replace, but go ahead, Steve.
In one of our earlier drafts, it was suggested that that trees being taken down would require a permit regardless of whether you were doing land development or anything. If it's just a normal homeowner decided to take a tree down of a certain size, they would have to come into the township with a permit. But that was one of the things that we discussed.
In the
It's not
microphone.
working?
It's not working well.
Yeah.
Hold on. Nathan, can you turn the volume up on the microphones?
Try to grab the one next to you.
Is this better? Yep. Oh, that's better. Sorry about that. Too much. In the draft before, it was in there as a consideration that anybody taking a tree down outside of land development, if the tree was at a certain size, they needed to come into the township for a permit. It was discussed at the time with the Board of Commissioners that was too invasive property rights, and that portion was taken out. There is still language in there which doesn't exist in our existing ordinance. There's language that we put in there that does have a more defined tree replacement calculation, which we don't have in our current ordinance.
That goes into the zone.
So we have beefed up the tree replacement ordinance based on development and stuff, but we took away the requirement that homeowners just taking a tree down of a certain size would need to come in for a permit.
Right. Gotcha. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Spiegelman?
Thank you, President Luker. Stephen, just a quick follow-up on that, or Stephen or Michael. That original regulation regarding homeowners having to come in to get a permit to take down a tree of a certain size, regardless of whether it was part of land development or just cutting down a tree. Was that stipulation originally requested by the Shade Tree Commission? Is that the one? Okay, I want to just make sure that's the same one I was thinking of, okay.
I believe it was part of conversations we had with the EAC and Shade Tree Commission, but, you know, a lot of stuff has been happening. A lot of stuff has happened. I can't remember exactly, but it did make it through the original drafting portion of that ordinance, and it was peeled back. That was the one part that was peeled back.
Gotcha, okay. Thank you.
Okay, any other,
How is it finally?
no, excuse me, you're out of order. Hold on. We'll take comments from the public in a moment, please. Any other comments or questions from commissioners? Commissioner Gillespie.
Thank you. Just one more. Mark, you're going to be talking about the signage? Are that political signs also? Okay, thank
Signs
you.
as well.
Thank you.
If there are no other comments from commissioners or questions, we'll turn it over to Mark Pennicow, our Abington Staff Code Enforcement. Thank you, Michael.
All right. Good evening, Commissioners. Thank you for attending. This has been probably one of the more hotly debated topics as we've gone through this process, mainly because of the uses we're dealing with. Political signs, there's been a lot of changes to the law as to what limitations municipalities can put on political signage. And then, as many of you are aware, we were approached several years ago about the installation of several billboards in Abington Township. Currently, there's 5 zoning hearing board cases still pending downstairs that are multiple years old, waiting for that to move forward. So as part of the zoning rewrite, we attempted to tackle both political signs and billboards. The first item I want to talk to you about is political signs. Today, let's get you to the right slide. Today in our ordinance, political signs have a limitation for residential properties of 16 square feet. No more than one sign can be displayed on any property for any single candidate. Political signs cannot be erected more than 30 days prior to an election date, and have to be removed within 10 days after the election. In the new ordinance, we're no longer permitted to put a sign limitation on the size of a political sign. There's no longer a limit on the number of signs allowed to be displayed on a property for any given candidate or party. Political signs are not permitted to be displayed on government property, parkland, school district property, or other public property, with the exception of on election day, if that's a polling place. We are no longer permitted to put a time limitation on how long a political sign may be displayed. Those are requirements that are handed down to us through the various cases that have come through the court system. We've adopted our zoning ordinance to stay in line with what's happened both on a state level and on a federal level, and we think we're in compliance now with the law. Our current zoning ordinance, and Larry can correct me if I'm wrong, the last 2 elections, we took a very hands-off approach to political signs because we knew the ordinance was unconstitutional, and if push came to shove, we ended up in court, we wouldn't be able to defend our position. Right. So now we have an ordinance that actually reflects what's going on today.
Mark, could you start the slideshow? Hit F5.
Pardon you?
Hit F5. We'll start the slideshow. Make it easier to read.
Okay. All right. The next item I want to talk to you about are billboards, which was not as heavily discussed as political signs. In our current ordinance, we don't permit off-premise signs the size of what you would normally see on a billboard. There is one existing billboard in Abington Township. It's on Moreland Road, right by the train track crossings in Ward 10. And it's been there since I was a kid. We do not take permits for the copy changes on that, and it's the only billboard we have. In our new ordinance, we set up parameters for billboards. They're permitted in the business center district only. The property must be a minimum of 10 acres in size. Property must have a minimum of 200 foot of street frontage. And the right-of-way of at least 80 feet. In other words, the street right-of-way, the actual ultimate right-of-way of at least 80 feet and 200 foot of frontage and be in the BC district before you can entertain a use by right for a billboard. No more than one billboard per property is permitted. Billboard must be at least 40 feet from all property lines. The discussion on that is any portion of the sign must be at least 40 feet. That way, I think we've covered the different parameters on how these signs are installed. Some are installed on masonry bases. Some of them are a pole-style sign. So by any portion of the sign, we'll do that measurement to 40 feet. We ensure we get our setback. Billboards are limited to no greater than 30 feet in height. And all billboards must be a minimum of 200 feet from any district permitting a residential use. So as you go through your ordinance, it's not just the R1 through R4 district, it would be the AO district and several of the village districts.
Mark, is that 10 acres going to be like a property has to have 10 acres before they can have one of these signs?
Correct. But if you look at the BC district, there's several properties in Abington that are 10 acres in size, where it's not just limited to one or two sites.
Just for reference, our BC districts are currently named the Planned Business District, our PB district, so that would be the Noble Fairway area, the Will Grove Mall, Huntington Valley Shopping Center, the, what's that? Out, where the Target, around the Target area, and also at where the Plaza and the Pavilion are in that area, are our planned business districts. Those are going to be changed to Business Center District. So those are our larger commercial districts.
And in terms of the,
And I'm sorry, they also support the 80-foot wide right-of-way. That's also a requirement.
I guess we don't really cross them any highways with them. In terms of, they like to put them next to a highway, like up in Upper Moreland, certainly, where there's not 10 acres. But I guess we don't have that. We don't
have that kind of situation in Abington.
Okay. Thank you.
Commissioner Schreiber, then Commissioner Gillespie.
I'm just kind of curious, since there's no longer a size limit on the political signs, if somebody wants to have a billboard that's a political sign, can they still only have it in the place that's in this district?
No limit to the size.
Political signs are labeled as temporary signs. The billboards would actually be permanent structures.
So somebody could have a billboard size, a political sign that's a billboard size?
Someone could have a large political sign on their property, correct?
Yes.
The
In a
restriction is
residential
going
section?
The restriction is going to be that it cannot block sight triangles, it can't block pedestrian traffic or vehicular traffic, or cause an actual danger.
still be
But
on the
political
front
signs
lawn.
are considered speech under the law.
Okay.
And
Commissioner Gillespie.
thank you. And there's no time limit. The federal government worries about environment, and what about our environment? There's no time limit on any of these signs. We just have to wait till they either rot or somebody might pick them up.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to talk. Yeah, we had this extensive conversation, and
And I know
think
it's a
this
federal
is-
thing.
this
I mean-
is- well, it's not even a federal government thing. It's more of it's a federal law.
The United States Supreme Court
Yeah, that's what I meant.
has weighed
not
in on
a,
this numerous times.
Not us.
Yeah.
We actually took a look at the most recent language, and we're actually recommending that this be broadened even a little bit further,
Right.
based on the language that was provided and what's consistent with federal law.
Commissioner Kalinowski.
So,
Thank you.
and I don't want to dwell on this because I think that's just crazy that you can leave a sign up that long. But is there a maintenance clause? I mean, you could just leave that sign out there as long as you want?
Political signs are considered speech.
Speech.
They are
I
protected
guess
by the First Amendment.
my other follow-up question, how about like Joe's Plumbing 215-55555 that are out there? They're allowed to leave those signs there, or is there an ordinance per se that, or is that not even part of what we're discussing?
Those are not political signs. I would allow
No,
Mr.
there's-
Benical to answer
yeah,
that.
So that's why I wanted to ask it, because you're talking about signage, so,
Yeah, there's language both within the existing ordinance and the proposed ordinance
uh-huh,
that deals with something called contracting signs.
okay.
Those signs are permitted to be put up. There is a limit on how many of them per property. Currently, it's 3. I'd have to go through the proposed ordinance to see what they are. I don't believe we changed it. Those signs are limited to 24 square feet apiece, and you have to be under contract with that individual contractor for that sign to be up.
And are you specifically talking about signs without the permission of the property owner that are just stuck in the
No, more
yard?
the property owner leaves a sign on his lawn that
Okay,
says that he got his plumbing fixed 6 years ago, and the sign's still there. You know, or,
There's a specific section required for construction signs.
so I was kind of looking for that, so, yeah.
Yeah, it's on page 211.
Okay. I'll look at it while we keep talking. If anybody else has something else.
Sorry, this sign thing. The billboards, and you said you have these permits waiting. So these can be those LED, right? They can be LED signs?
This was an application that was presented to Abington, going by memory, I'm going to tell you at least 3 years ago.
I remember.
It was for 5 separate locations,
I
2 in the
remember.
Willow Grove area, 1 in the
Valley.
Huntington Pike area, and several sites along Old York Road. If you remember correctly, the signs were rather large,
Yeah.
rather high, and were not even contained within the property. They required zoning hearing board relief, and at that case, they elected to take another legal avenue other than going in front of the zoning hearing board. So those cases are still out there sitting. But-
And none of them, if I remember correctly, are justified by the ordinance that we're putting together.
Good.
So I think that's maybe where you were headed.
That's where I was headed. I
Yeah.
go over the Walt Whitman Bridge, I see these signs, and I'm like,
Yeah.
wow, is that going to be on Huntington Pike? Excuse me?
The ordinance we're proposing maintains them in our larger commercial districts. I believe none of those signs were in properties that would meet the requirements of this. And it wasn't done for that purpose. It was done because we wanted to keep them, the requirements were 40 feet away from the 40-foot setbacks. We wanted them to have larger properties so that they weren't sandwiched into a small property. So there were reasons for the decisions we made in the sense of being able to, having required to allow them in the township.
Particularly Huntington Pike has houses right across the street, you
Right.
know?
Okay, any other questions, Commissioners? Right.
The next
Continue.
section that I have for you is a section near and dear to our hearts, administration and permits. This particular section incorporates both the building permit end, zoning hearing board end, and actions by the Board of Commissioners as it comes to conditional use and other types of applications. The main thing getting started with this was to clean up the language to reflect how the permit review process is actually completed today. In our current ordinance, we have several entities listed that no longer exist. With the mergers of state and federal offices, many of the reviews that are done outside of Abington Township are handled by one agency that has multiple tasks. So we streamline the language in there to include DEP and eliminate some of their subsections since everything goes through them. Also FEMA, Army Corps of Engineers, our stormwater management ordinances. If you remember back, was 3 separate ordinances, one to handle each one of the watershed associations. So we've now brought that under one umbrella. We cleaned up the inspection requirements to reflect all the additional inspections required for development in 2017. you're aware, you see the subdivision and land development applications that come in before you. There are a lot more requirements today as you go through DEP with sanitary sewer calculations, the amount of review and expense that goes into stormwater management. So that's now all included in with the ordinance. We removed a lot of the repetitive language. In multiple sections in the current ordinance, it repeats the same thing, that it's the duties of the township engineer, the duties of the zoning officer, the duty of staff. Okay, it's our duty. We understand our job. One paragraph at the very top covers that, and we know who does what. We've added the requirements for conditional use review to bring Abington Township into compliance with the MPC. The thought process here was to provide the board some more definitive language of the things that should be considered when you're looking at a conditional use application and some of the conditions you may want to look at imposing as you review this ordinance. So it was strictly just a guideline for the Board of Commissioners as you go through your review process. We added additional, we did that one. We created a link to the requirements within the subdivision land development ordinance. You heard Michael talk about that earlier. The links that you see with the tree preservation and the preferred tree planting list, and there's several other connections that are in there. Created separate definitions within the non-conforming use section. In our current ordinance, non-conforming everything is lumped into one paragraph. Non-conforming lots, non-conforming signs, non-conforming structures, it's all one heading. The proposed new ordinance breaks it down and gives you a separate definition for each of those items. We provided greater detail to the zoning hearing board in their review of applications. It highlighted the items that were brought forth from the comprehensive plan and from some of the studies that were done as to what's important to the commissioners, to give the zoning hearing board some guidelines as to the types of items they should be looking at. So, we added an entire section on stormwater management and the permits and what's required there. We've reduced the overlap between the code enforcement department and the township engineering department. We work hand in hand, conversations daily. There's permits that I don't issue downstairs unless I have the receipt or a copy of a signed permit for engineering for stormwater management. We set up the system that way years ago. It works. I inherited it when you brought me on board 20-plus years ago. But we've eliminated all the overlap. It's the zoning officer's responsibility. It's the engineer's responsibility. It's township staff's responsibility. That way we get it covered. We've added language in the use and occupancy section to allow for temporary use and occupancies in order to comply with the requirements of the current building code. Our zoning ordinance did not permit temporary use and occupancy certificates, where the state building code does. So we've cleaned up that language to stay compliant with the building code. A temporary occupancy certificate might be granted for a variety of simple reasons. They're missing a hand wash sign in a bathroom. It's on order. It's coming in a week. There's things that come up on a regular basis where a temporary should be issued. There's no reason to hold up a store from opening. So now the two ordinances play hand in hand. Where did we leave off? We added additional duties to the zoning ordinance, to the zoning officer, that spells out the new responsibilities under the floodplain ordinance, and what goes on with that on a now quarterly basis. We file a quarterly report with FEMA. That report's not filed. There's fines involved. So we've added that responsibility in as far as the reporting duties to FEMA, so that we try to keep ahead of the game and do what we're supposed to do legally. That about cleans up the administration and permit, at least the highlights of the changes. I'll answer whatever other questions you may have.
Are there any questions of Commissioners of Mr. Pennicow? Mr. Spiegelman? Commissioner Spiegelman, I'm sorry.
I do. If you don't mind, Mark, if we could jump back to the billboard section, because I was trying to figure something out. With regard to a location of the billboard in those various areas that were described, the Abington Town Center, the mall area, et cetera, do the restrictions relative to residential areas, the distance from residential areas, does that refer to any part of the parcel that's going to contain the billboard, or the physical billboard itself?
I think it's the physical billboard, Commissioner.
Okay.
The object is to eliminate the light glare, the public nuisance of having a sign illuminating your side of your house for X number of hours.
If we had made it to the property line, we would have no locations in the township that could be 200 feet away from a residentially zoned or a property that allows a residential use, because almost all our commercial districts abut residentially or properties that could have a residential use on them. So it's actually from the billboard structure itself.
Right. So that renders I mean, I know that we could talk about individual examples for 7 hours straight and not be done with them, but just to throw out one. Hypothetically, if, say, on the Target parcel or on the Abington Town Center parcel that contains Michael's and Corner Bakery and such, if out near Old York Road there were that's an area where a billboard could be erected.
The target parcel would be very difficult, only because you have residential directly behind it. Yeah. And the commercial properties that front Old York Road are at best 150 to 200 feet deep, and there's residential directly behind them. So if those residential districts are within 200 foot of that sign, then you got a problem. You can't put it there.
But I'm saying on the Abington Town Center side, so on the...
I understand that.
Okay.
But let's take the Abington Town Center sign and directly across from the Kitchen Bar. Familiar with that?
I am extremely familiar
Okay, so
with that.
now we have a sign that sits back 40 feet from the front property line. So we got 80 foot right away. You're at 120 right there. How deep's the Kitchen Bar property before you get to Mr. Coyne's property? That buffers it.
Not that deep.
There you go.
All right, then. Question answered. Thank you.
I have another question. I'm into signs.
Commissioner Spiegelman, you done?
For now, yeah, thank you.
Commissioner Gillespie.
Signs are really, I'm into them tonight. Just one question. I always thought that we weren't to put signs between the curb and the sidewalk. Is that allowable?
True. You're not supposed to put signs in the public right away.
Can we do it now?
You can.
I don't want to, but I don't want to, but I'm just saying, I see them out there.
You do see them out there. Generally, there are people like me that put them there that are trumpeting some type of sports registration or,
Or real
a 5K run for a special event.
No, it wouldn't be there for mine. No, but I just, like real estate signs, they shouldn't be out there.
Real estate signs are required to be on property. The only real estate signs that are permitted in the public right-of-way are your directional signs for your
an open house.
for your open houses, and you're well aware of those requirements. They can go up 3 days prior to the event and have to come down once it's over.
I am well aware.
Yeah.
But the other factor with signs in the right of way is if they create a sight line distance problem, they could be removed in the public right of way.
I'm all for it.
Any other questions from Commissioners? Does that conclude your formal presentation, Mr. Klein?
The only other revision that is going to be incorporated in the next draft is 2 map amendments. One is a map amendment on Cedar Road. Do you have that?
Well, I don't
There's a group of properties across from McKinley School that are zoned R1, and most of those properties meet the dimensional regulations of R2. So that area is going to have a map amendment to change it from R1 to R2 in the next revision.
In the next revision?
Yes. And then there's a portion on Pembroke Road, which is in the Crosswick section.
Right.
that also has the same situation. We did this a couple years ago, similar in that area. I think it was on Deline, correct? There are a series of properties that exist in Pembroke that are zoned R1, which are 1 acre minimums, and the property dimensional. If the property layouts, the existing property layouts that are all developed actually meet more of the requirements of R2, and to take away more of, to give them less nonconformities, we're proposing a map amendment for those to be zoned R2 instead of R1.
When do you anticipate those revisions?
Those revisions will be incorporated. So remember, the 2016 ordinance that was advertised, the last few things that Mark went over, which was the sign ordinance, the administrative section, and these map changes were not included in that 2016 ordinance. So those will be part of the re-advertising for the for the next version.
Okay.
And, Mr. President, if I may,
Yes,
we did take a look at this, and the Solicitor's Office is recommending one additional change. With respect to the zoning hearing board, the municipality's planning code does determine when notices to surrounding property owners are notified of variances, special exceptions, and appeals from the zoning officer's determination, but the municipality has to determine the distance of those notifications that need to be provided. That was not included in this draft, so we're recommending that that be included in the revised ordinance.
Okay.
Yeah.
If I could take this
And
opportunity...
that's part of the administrative section.
If I could take this opportunity to thank Vice President Stephen Klein, Chair of the Zoning Rewrite Committee, Mr. Mike Narkowicz, Principal Planner of the Montgomery County Planning Commission, our own Larry Mateo and Mark Pennical of our Abington Staff Code Enforcement Department, and our solicitor, Miss Lauren Gallagher. So with that, are there any other, yes?
I just had one quick question following up, Stephen. Pembroke is in my ward. Is there anything that briefly we can state as to any impact or change that those residents would experience based on the change in their zoning?
Yeah, Michael's going to put it up on a map.
Okay.
Thank you.
To answer your question while he pulls that up, it should be a benefit to the property owner, sir. Right now, they're under the development regulations for an R1 property, 25% impervious coverage, 20%, I'm sorry, 25% impervious, 20% building. But more importantly is the setbacks, 50-foot front yard, 20-foot sides, 30-foot rear. For lots that are 15 to 22,000 square feet in size, they're less than, in some cases, they're less than a third of an acre. In many cases, all of them are under a half an acre. By having the R2 district standards, it'll give them the benefit of actually developing a property to the standards that we accept here in Abington for the actual size of what it is they own.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Commissioner Luker.
You can see the map up here.
Yeah, and there's the...
Explain how it is.
Sure. Okay, so you can see there in yellow there, that would be the area on Pembroke that would change from R1 to R2. So that is for, and then that's the R2 low to medium density residential district.
Just so the board's aware, the streets, Suffolk, Landfair, Norfolk, Rhodes, Essex, they're all zoned R2 now. The only, and they're all, it's one neighborhood that was built out as an overall development. The only ones that are over there that are not zoned R2, that are similar in size, is this western side of Pembroke Road. So that's why the recommendation to make that change.
Okay. Commissioner Myers, you had a question?
Yeah, real quick. When the meeting was held for the public at Rydell Elementary School, the zoning for Willow Hill and the Willow Hill area had somehow extended out to Old Welsh Road and accidentally included the residents on Old Welsh Road. Was that corrected? Because that zoning was really, community service or what school was just to be for the school property, not the residential property, not the residential bordering property.
Yeah, I'll pull up that zoning change map.
I just want to make sure it gets done.
I want to make sure that was picked up. That was at Roslyn. That was our first neighborhood meeting that we had.
Okay. So, and which street are you?
Old Welsh Road,
Okay.
right by Willow Hill School.
Right at Coolidge.
Okay, yeah, okay. So you have a section going to RC Recreation Conservation in the green, and then a section going to, I guess that's is that R3? R4, which is
Okay.
a single-family district.
Okay.
We had that originally all green.
Very good.
Yeah, and so that's Osborne extending down along the green. I know you can't see the letters, I apologize.
Richard, we'll make you a copy of this.
Yeah, because it's hard to see up there, and, you need your specific area enlarged.
Right.
Okay. Any other questions of commissioners? I want to take, again, this opportunity to thank everyone involved on this. This is years of hard work on all your parts, and thank you for our counselor for her assistance in seeing this project through. At this point, I'd like to close the hearing and open it to...
If I could just mention one thing, I mean, there are a couple people here. Ashley Spearman was involved, who's from our Planning Commission. I believe Rita Stevens is here. She was also involved. I might be leaving some people out that are here, but there was a lot of people involved in this. I mean, Mark, Larry, myself, and Michael only really did a lot of the cleanup at the end without the rest of the committee, but the whole ordinance was drafted and worked on extensive hours. There were a lot of subcommittees that worked on specific portions, and that was not done by the four of us. That was done by a much larger group.
Could you summarize that so we can give a proper...
I'll try to remember. I mean, our former Assistant Township Manager, Matt Lahaza, was involved for quite a long time. Former Commissioner Carol DeJoseph, former Commissioner Jay O'Connor were involved at early stages. Ashley, Ed Meebus, her former Zoning Hearing Board member.
So this goes back about, 8 years?
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of people. There was George Kineski, Eli Zucker were involved. Judith from the hospital. We had, I'm just trying to remember all the different people at some point. And Don Marquardt from our from our Abington Township Planning Commission was involved. We had Kathy from the AC. We had people like Rita and some of the people from the AC and Shade Tree Commission working on specific areas. I'd be remiss, I can't remember everybody, but there was there were a lot of people in and out of this committee that worked on various parts of this.
And the county, Commissioner.
And the county.
There were a lot of model ordinances that were sent down by the county that we were able to, at least gave us a footprint to work from moving forward.
Well, I think in summary, you all did a fine job. So at this point, I'd like to open it up to the public for any questions. If you would, kindly come up to the podium, state your name and address for the record, and state your question.
My name's Rita Stevens, 115 Stanley Avenue, and I chair the Shade Tree Commission. In preparation for this evening, the Shade Tree Commission took the December 2016 version that was posted on the web as of a week ago and went in very close detail looking at the landscaping section just to see what we might have missed. We've certainly been involved in many of the iterations. Really, overall, very pleased. What we would like to do is to have the possibility after this meeting before the 2017 to offer some cleanup comments. Just briefly, the nature of them is that while we have an excellent intent and a very good structure to this, we feel like we can make this a much better language in several places by pulling from the ISA standards. That's the International Society of Arboriculture, which is the industry standard, particularly where we talk about pruning protection and replacement considerations that are laid there. And I think with that, that will result in a more clear document as one that's a more practical document, so that just looking for its utility going forward. The one other comment we have is that we would like to have the opportunity to take a last look on preservation of more wooded areas on larger lots. I do see in the Land Preservation District overlay that there is a consideration for maintaining of natural features, which include woodlands, but it didn't look like it was quite complete, and we would like to have some consideration of that as we go forward to making the 2017 version of this.
Okay,
So,
thank you.
Thanks for that.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments from the public?
Good evening. My name is Ken Clark. I live at 338 Abington Avenue, Glenside section of Abington Township. Been a resident for 69 years and 10 months of this township. In the late 60s, early 70s, the then administration of this fire department, the Abington Township Fire Department, were able to convince the Board of Commissioners at the time to take commercially zoned areas of the township and require that those areas, any construction in those areas, be done with non-combustible material. It enhanced the life safety of the people in those zones. It also significantly enhanced the life safety to the responding emergency services personnel, especially the firefighters who have to go into these buildings. I've been asking for a year about whether or not there's going to be a sentence or a paragraph that's going to carry over the existing non-combustible requirements into the newly designated zones. And I guess that's my first question here this evening.
Okay, does someone want to answer that? Mr. Klein, Commissioner Klein.
Do you want that, or do you want?
I can certainly answer that. The current, the code that Mr. Clark is referencing is Chapter 62 of the current Abington Township Code, which has a cross-reference to certain zoning districts that require the use of non-combustible materials in construction. This question came up because obviously all of the zoning district names are changing. So we did take a close look at this. And in order to have such a requirement in the code, we would have to send a draft ordinance up to the Department of Labor and Industry and have them approve the request. There was a case that came down recently from the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, which established that unless the Department of Labor and Industry approves a local change to the Uniform Construction Code, that those codes are both a ceiling and a floor. Ceiling and a floor, sorry. I tend to talk too fast, so just slow me down if I don't. Okay. So with that recent case law, along with the change to the names of these districts and the locations of these districts, we are of the opinion that in order to maintain that requirement, we would have to send this up to the Department of Labor and Industry for a determination as to whether that's permissible. And for this, the standard that Labor and Industry would apply to it is whether there are unique circumstances to Abington Township to mandate that requirement.
So you would have to make a draft ordinance request of the Department of Labor and Industry?
Correct.
Okay, and how, okay, well, Commissioner Zappone, go ahead, you jump in.
Was that request ever sent up?
We have not been directed to send that request up, no.
By who, this board here?
By the board, correct.
It would have to be sent up by the board?
We have not been asked to draft an ordinance that would, right.
What does that really entail to send that up? I mean, is it just a letter from us, or?
It's actually a fairly simple process. It's actually the review that becomes very complicated. What it would have to entail would be we would prepare an ordinance, send it up to the Department of Labor and Industry along with a summary of what the township believed were the unique circumstances to Abington Township, which would necessitate the deviation from the UCC.
So most places don't have this, as far as you know?
No, this is not a standard that's in the UCC. This is not something that's in place in other municipalities. The standard for labor and industry is fairly stringent. They certainly have granted local exceptions, but it's not it's not the norm to do that. The purpose of the Uniform Construction Code is uniformity, so that a builder can go to various townships and know what the codes are. So it's not favored, but it certainly does happen.
Commissioner Sabah.
I think it's a priority here to protect our firefighters. I mean, this is something we should get working on as quickly as possible. You know, we're putting these folks' lives in danger here, and I think it's a priority. You know, we sit here and talk about other things, but their protection, their safety is priority to me, and it should be to this board. So that's something that we should get on as quickly as possible.
Okay. So this would require an ordinance being prepared, correct?
Well, I think it's, I mean, my only comment to this is, from what
Not a zoning
the ordinance stands outside of the zoning ordinance. This is not part, this non-combustible portion of our code is not part of the zoning ordinance, is not part of the zoning code. It's something that sits outside of it. The connection to it, as the fire marshal talked about, is the zoning district names that are labeled in it are going to change. Instead of having planned business, we're going to have business center, and instead of having special commercial and town commercial, we're going to have the Main Street district. So the names have changed, but once again, the non-combustible, this ordinance that the fire marshal's talking about sits outside of the zoning ordinance. So it's not something we've dealt with in ours, but it's something that we've had conversations with the solicitor's office. I'm not sure of the time of how that happens, whether we have to adopt the ordinance first and then do that, or can we do it simultaneously?
You typically send it up first for review by Labor and Industry. We'd have to look a little bit closer at the actual procedure, but I believe typically you send it up first for approval. And Mr. Klein is correct. This is an ordinance outside the zoning update that really is separate apart from the zoning update. It's Chapter 62 of the code that has
So
to do
who
with
would be
building
responsible for enacting the ordinance, Mr. Mateo? Would that come through code?
Well, I think there's still other questions out there, though. Commissioner, you had a question?
Oh, I'm sorry, Commissioner Bowman.
Well, it sounds like you just can't get it because you want it. In other words, Abington just can't have a non-combustible ordinance because we'd like to have it for fire safety. I think Lauren's getting at the point is, unless you have some special circumstance in Abington that requires some non-combustible, you just can't really have a non-combustible. That's what I'm gathering.
It's a very high burden of proof that a municipality faces.
Well,
Even though we've had it for a while?
That's not the standard that the Labor and Industry looks at.
precedence doesn't count.
It's not that precedence doesn't count. It's the standard that that Labor and Industry has to look at is now it used to be that the UCC was a floor and townships were allowed to enact more stringent standards. That's no longer the case. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court has said it's both a ceiling and a floor.
Well, we're not acting more stringent standards. We've had the more stringent standard. It's existing.
And that standard was never approved by the Department of Labor and Industry.
Well, here we go with a similar related situation. Who legally represents the interest of the Abington Township Fire Department? If we have a legal issue, the Abington Township Fire Department, who represents the Abington Township Fire Department?
So I would say we as a board, correct me if I'm wrong.
As far as, do you mean as far as an attorney?
Yes.
We are the township solicitor. If
Right.
the fire department is a department of the township, then that would fall under our purview.
Well, several months back, Mr. Clark told me that he doesn't represent me.
We represent the township, so our obligation is to the township.
So he represents the fire department.
To the extent that it's a township department, it does fall within the scope of our services. Just
Was
like
it
we
possible to
advise-
get a second opinion on this?
A second opinion on the advice we're giving?
Yes.
The township has retained Rudolph Clark to advise it on legal matters of concern to the township, and this is the opinion that we have provided.
Okay, well, there's been some conflict with another issue in the township, and I think some of you commissioners were at meetings when a certain legal issue was described and information put forth to the commissioners, and then another group of attorneys came in and sort of were opposed to that particular decision, and we're advising going in a different decision. So I'm just saying that if we're not pleased with this decision, can we run it past somebody else just for a second opinion? Kind of like we're going to the doctor.
Well, I'm gonna get a couple of questions, because I don't know how this pertains to the zoning rewrite, but it sounds like we have two different issues here. But go ahead, let me get questions from the Commissioner. Commissioner
Okay.
Zappone, and then Rothman, and then Myers.
Okay, so we had a request made. We don't know whether we can get this or not. And we don't do nothing about it to find out if we can get it, but put their lives in danger.
Well, I wouldn't say we're not doing anything.
We
The question
didn't
just
do
came.
nothing for a year.
Well,
And
the
we're sitting
question-
here, well, I don't know, maybe we can get it, maybe we can't. Well, do we know if we can or we can't?
Okay, well,
Simple.
let's hold off a second. Commissioner Rothman, go ahead.
Two questions or comments. I think ultimately, Mr. Clark, I think the only thing that really matters is what the labor board, or what's the?
Labor and
Labor
industry.
industry.
Labor and industry decides. So regardless of what Rudolph Clark or, Bob's attorney office would tell us, it would be the determination there. So I think in eliminating the need for a second opinion, I think for us to solicit the determination is really what your concern is, and I think as well as what Commissioner Zappone is saying, because, for example, if we had another firm tell us a different thing, we still would have to have the ordinance itself approved on a higher level. So it's not the commissioners that can decide if this is legally appropriate or not, or our solicitor. It would be a document approving our ordinance from the state level. So,
Well, Commissioner, if I can, 2 years ago, I was told by some people that were involved in this that it was going to be a simple paragraph and we would have the ordinance. It was pre-existing. They just had to describe the new zones versus the old zones, and everything would be fine. All of a sudden, there's this hubbub about having to go to labor and industry. Now, I don't know if that's a fact or not.
Sure.
And, there's a benefit. There's a benefit to some people if we lose this ordinance that we've had since the 70s. And can anybody tell me when the last commercial building fire went to the ground in Abington Township?
If I could just respond, I'm not opposing what you're saying. What I'm saying is that if we, in my career as an attorney, I've seen this multiple times. If you have a piece of paper that says, that gives what you're saying as the ultimate goal that you have here with the ordinance continuing, if that piece of paper is not legal and in compliance with state regulations and state law, then it's not worth anything. It's just a piece of paper. So the appropriate way for us as a board to, if we chose to take this to make it a concrete document, then we would have to take it to another level to make sure that it is. Otherwise, it's literally a flimsy scenario. So regardless of, and I'm not expressing an opinion one way or the other right now, but what I'm saying is that if we want as a board, a concrete determination of this, we need to go to that step. And which leads to my next question, Lauren. If we were to solicit this determination, I know many boards and government agencies have a backlog. Would this be something we could get a result on relatively quickly? I know you can't tell me exactly, but I mean, are we looking at 4 years, or are we looking at a month?
No, I don't think you're looking at 4 years. I don't think you're looking at a month. I think you're probably looking in the more months to quarters range. And just to your point, the law on this is very clear.
Yep.
The only agency that can approve these types of deviations from the UCC is the Department of Labor and Industry.
And are we able to proceed with enacting the zoning ordinance?
Yes. This is not a zoning ordinance.
So we can get this done and then still be revisiting what
Yes.
Fire Marshal is requesting that we look into?
Yes. That is a completely separate ordinance. The Chapter 62 is completely separate and distinct from the zoning ordinance.
If our fire prevention ordinance was approved by the state, And I'm being told that it was, even though some other people have a different opinion. The reason it was approved was because it's more stringent than the International Fire Code. So why is it that if our codes were approved at the time, now all of a sudden, this code has to resurface and be kicked to the state? It was more stringent, and townships were allowed to have more stringent codes.
The law, quite simply, the law has changed. There's recent case law that says that the township is required to obtain approval to be more stringent than the UCC. And that's a more recent code, or I'm sorry, a more recent case that came down.
But our codes were approved back when we went to
This
the
was-
International Building Code.
This change was not approved.
Okay, let's let Mark jump in. He has a
I just had
comment.
a question. It seems like the total debate has been about the fact that the names of the districts have been reworded. So-
Mark, that's what triggered the question, but that's not what triggered the enforceability of Chapter 62.
My question was quite simply, does it help the debate if you just change the names back? Instead of having a business center, you go back to a PB district. Instead of having a mixed-use district and a town commercial district, you go back to, or instead of having a village district, you go back to town commercial.
It would not, because the enforceability of Chapter 62 is a question, and it's, in our opinion, not enforceable unless we have L&I approved that, regardless of what the zoning districts are called.
So that negates that.
It just raised the question.
Right.
Mr.
Okay,
President,
Commissioner Myers.
Thank
and
you.
then Speaker.
I'm thinking that if this ordinance has been enforced since 1970s, is that correct?
That's correct.
Then certainly through all of those years, we've had a number of builders that have complied with that ordinance,
Some reluctantly.
but nevertheless have complied, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So if this is reversed, or can't they sue us?
No. No, they had an opportunity to do so when that requirement was imposed upon them, and they did not. And to clarify, obviously, anyone can sue anyone at any time for any reason. The success of that lawsuit would be unlikely to be successful.
I think that we have to make every effort to support that this ordinance, if you rename it, whatever, take it to labor industry, do whatever we have to do to keep it, because I think it's hugely important, and I think there's a huge difference between Fire Marshal, help me with the wording, with a wood, for commercial building, a wood foundation, a wood structure, as opposed to a brick or concrete structure? Is that basically, or a steel structure?
You all have a copy of a PowerPoint that Johnny Moore and I sort of helped put together earlier today. Mr. President, the work that's being done in the projects, you were there for the fire, right?
Yes,
What was
sir.
it like, 4 weeks ago?
Yes, sir.
Did you talk to the people that were building the building?
Yes.
Did they tell you that they couldn't understand why they had to build the building in Abington Township the way they had to build the building? But once the fire happened, they were like real happy they built it that way. Because if they built it the way you could build it everywhere else, it seems, in the state of Pennsylvania, that building would have gone to the ground, brand-new building,
They
before it
did
was
say
even
that.
occupied.
They did say that, yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know what to tell you. We've been enforcing this since the 70s. No one has knocked on our door and said, I don't like this ordinance. I don't think I should have to comply. Let me appeal it. It hasn't come to us that way. I just have some problems with the way this whole thing has been, like, formulated.
Why wouldn't we take the extra steps for this? Why wouldn't we do everything possible to defend this ordinance?
think it falls in the same category as the billboards or the political signage. There's, sort of a envelope of the law that we can act within, and, I mean, sure, we'll take it as far as we can in the interest of safety. Nobody argues that, but, I mean, on the other hand, we wouldn't advance an illegal ordinance. We just, I mean, what would be the sense in doing that? I mean, I'm happy to seek the review. I don't think anybody's saying that, even though, I mean, if the chances of it passing are not likely, then that's a whole other story. It might just fall on its face, but I don't think anybody's standing in the way of that. Thank you.
Mr. Spiegelman.
So just, if I can just get an overview of this, so I understand, and so maybe some folks who are watching or folks in the audience can kind of understand. All right, so the Supreme Court decision renders this part of our existing ordinance, our existing building code, unenforceable. The non-combustible, the more stringent non-combustible portion that's been in effect for decades.
The adoption of the UCC and the adoption of this more stringent standard was questionable before that. The more recent Pennsylvania Supreme Court case made it very clear that this was not permissible unless it was approved by L&I.
Okay, and that supersedes any approval of our most recent fire codes.
Correct.
So, and this is also separate entirely from the adoption of the zoning ordinance.
Correct.
So, in order to, the procedure, in order to get, to basically restore as township enforceable, a non-combustible, the more rigorous standards, bricks versus sticks, let's say. The procedure is, an ordinance needs to be submitted to L&I, and then whatever pressure put on them to expedite, not let it sit for 2 years on a shelf or something, or whatever.
I would be surprised if it took quite that long. I don't know, and again, I can't speak for Ellen. I don't know what they have on their plate, but
I don't know them, but I'm sure I know somebody there. I don't know.
My experience with L&I in general matters has been that it's not quite as long as some of our other agencies that we deal with.
So that ordinance, is that ordinance something that's, okay, the submission of that ordinance to L&I for consideration, which I'm assuming would be supported by the fact that this is something that, the supporting evidence being this is something the township's been doing for many years, and the records on fire safety, and that we haven't had some of these examples the fire marshal provided have not happened here specifically because we have bricks versus sticks. That would all be submitted. Is that something that has to be initiated by the board, or can that just happen?
If the board wants to provide direction tonight, I'm happy to start preparing something to go up to L&I.
Does that require a vote?
If there is just direction that you're giving me, so it would actually come back for a formal vote when the actual draft is prepared, and then you would direct us at that time to send it up. But as far as preparing the ordinance, no, it seems to be the general consensus that pursuing that avenue and at least sending it up to L&I would be something that the board's interested in, so I'm happy to prepare that. Like I said, it would come back for a formal vote for forwarding to L&I.
I mean, I'm correct. That is the only mechanism now in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania for adopting that, and I don't see any reason to wait. I mean, it doesn't seems pretty clear.
If I can delay this meeting another 2 minutes, I'd like to bring up John Rohr. He's a certified building code official, state licensed. He's had conversations with the people from L&I, and he can shed some light on this. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
John Rohr, 2809 Meyer Avenue, ROHRER. In that packet that we did present in front of you, the first page is Ordinance 1916. It was the adoption of the Uniform Construction Code with amendments for Abington Township. It was reviewed and approved by L&I at the state level to include local amendments to the code, which incorporated Ordinance 1795, basically our non-combustible, which we're discussing right now. along with other amendments that the building department has. Through legal matters I don't want to get into, I personally, along with the township building code officials, have spoken directly to the director of L&I in Harrisburg. We have documentation from them. These ordinances are in effect, and they are enforceable. If they were not, our building department would not be permitted to issue a permit. They're audited every year to see that we have compliance with L&I. So, where changes of opinion have come in, we're not aware of it. L&I has not put us on notice that we cannot enforce any of our ordinances. We go to training every year, and nothing has changed in the training. If you had an ordinance that exceeds the code, the Uniform Construction Code, in place 1999 or earlier, as long as it's more stringent and it was approved by L&I, it is in effect today. The only time you have to submit an ordinance to L&I today is if you change your code. Then any amendment would have to be sent and approved. That's directly from the training classes we attend and directly from L&I. So, that's just another opinion, I guess. Thank you for your time.
Well, Mr. Rohr, actually, we've now heard that our court has said that the code is both a ceiling and a floor. So we can't go. The code is
my question would be, if it's a ceiling and a floor, how could we go to L&I now and ask them to exceed their ceiling or floor?
It sounds like you have to show special circumstances.
Yeah, that was already done. So,
Okay, before I go back to, are you finished, Mr. Orr? Thank you. I have a comment in the back. Is it on the same subject? Yes. Name and address, please.
Raymond Bell, 2076 Parkview Avenue, and I apologize because there's a lot of people here wanting to understand better this plan that I heard about last night, but I'm going to tell you something. I have never, ever been more embarrassed that we allow fire people to go to a fire and put their lives on the line, and all I'm hearing is, we just need to send this letter to Harrisburg. That's appalling. And I would be embarrassed if I were all of you. Thank you.
Sorry? Come forward.
D. Adcock, 1714 Brook Road.
I'm sorry, can you spell your name?
D. D-E-E, Adcock, A-D-C-O-C-K. And actually, I have three relatively simple questions that are far less important than what's being discussed, so I feel bad about this. But will the new ordinance, or the ordinance that is being reviewed for approval, have any effect on the present zoning at Rydell Waters, I suppose, the old, the property that is next door to me, yes, that I adjoin. And will it have any effect on that present zoning or the density there? And secondly, will it have any effect on the, I guess, upcoming in 2 nights, the zoning requirements or limitations on Brandolini? Thank you. Between the two of us, we're doing a good job of communicating. You're my man.
So the SNR district, the Senior Neighborhood Residential District that was enacted for the Rydell, what is now Rydell Parks property that is behind you, that was approved for age-restricted housing, 62 and above, has not changed. It has been just copied and put into this ordinance. Okay. So that has not changed. The the FTD ordinance, the Fairway Transit District ordinance, the provisions that were written for the Fairway Transit District were incorporated into our new ordinance for the Noble Fairway area. So in a sense, it has not changed. It's been incorporated into it, but renamed as a business center district.
So it's not changing it, but
The name will not
Fine.
exist. The Fairway Transit District name will not exist. It now will be incorporated into the Business Center District for the Noble Fairway area. So the provisions that were adopted for the Fairway Transit District are the same, just given a different name.
all right, then in my simplest version,
The easy way to
what's,
explain it, Mr. Adcock, is the density remain the same, setbacks, the coverage numbers, the building heights. The only thing that changed, sir, is its name.
thanks.
There you go. Its name.
We'll get back to the other question in a minute. Mr. Sweeney. Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. President, Commissioners. My name is Roman Prosick, P-R-O-C-Y-K. I live at 1265 Old Ford Road, and I'm an Abington Township resident for 17 years. I commend the Board of Commissioners and the Township staff for your effort in reviewing and revising the zoning ordinance of the Township, and thank you for calling this meeting this evening. I looked at the proposals in the context of a real situation in my neighborhood, and one that concerns residents, some of whom are here present at this hearing tonight. We're concerned about protecting the character, the safety, and general welfare of our community. At the core is what we believe to be unlawful clear-cutting of woodlands, over an acre. It happened this January in an area that has steep slope. It includes the denuding of the public right-of-way along our street, roughly 5,000 square feet of woodland. We have yet to grasp the consequences of the damage in terms of stormwater runoff, wind and sun exposure, air quality issues, and so forth. And there's concern about how the street's appearance is going to affect property values. There's uncertainty also about the remediation that may take place. So we looked at the new or the draft of the proposed code and the old code to see how this situation would be addressed under one and the other. I would say that the landscaping article in the new code opens with a very strong and necessary statement about aims and principles, and that's commendable. But then the sections that follow are, in our opinion, weaker than the old code. And if I still have a minute or two, I'd like to go into some specifics. In looking at the new draft, a definition that is important is site disturbance. In the old version, it was activity which causes land to be exposed to the danger of erosion by removal of vegetation and/or trees. In the new code, the definition in Article 2 is activity involving installation of ground cover, grading, filling or excavation of land, or erection of a dwelling, or altering of an existing stormwater management facility. So the removal of trees seems to be dropped. Or the question is, does the installation of ground cover foresee tree removal in that process? If it does not, I'd like to urge the commissioners to add back the removal of trees in the definition of site disturbance in Article 2 definitions. The definition of site disturbance presented in Article 16, Steep Slope Conservation District, Section 1602, says that site disturbance is any activity which removes the vegetative cover from the land surface. So this is a sort of a variant, and the two definitions may need to be harmonized When we look at tree preservation, our major concern is that the protections that are needed may seem to encroach on the property rights of owners to do as they please on land and property that they own. But in a populated township such as ours, and with a finite pool of woodland and open space to go around, such protections, strong protections, are fair and in the best interests of all residents. So, to continue with some of the details, the reason for adding back tree removal into the new code comes in the subsection on the language of preservation of existing vegetation. In the old code, I'm thinking of section 801UD, preservation of existing vegetation, we had 3 subparagraphs: site disturbances, according to that original definition, as I just said, and standalone trees. Subparagraph 2, woodland. Subparagraph 3, woodland and multi-lot developments. That was the entire spectrum covered. In the new code, there's a section on public, a new section on public trees and private trees, and it's commendable that there is this new section on public trees. But the private tree section, it's difficult for us to understand if this case of clear cutting that we're facing right now would be covered at all, because the regulations cover subdivision and land development and site disturbance, but yet site disturbance doesn't include tree removal. So that's where we're sort of lost. And again, we're only looking at the new code. We're not looking at SALDO or other related documents that might come in. And this, just another point on the side, for homeowners, it would be very beneficial if we can get an extract of the code that pertains to R1, R2, R3, R4, something that would be relatively easy to do if you have the text in a text processor and use a computer. So, in other words, it's not clear to us if these regulations also cover single-family residential lots. Subdivisions, land divisions, they do not. So the only linkage is through site disturbance, and that's another reason why we want to look at that definition again. The new draft covers several points. Existing lots, adding new impervious coverage. But in our situation, we had over an acre of woodland lost. We're talking about several generations of growth. And there's no clear indication that the impervious coverage will change. So that regulation in the new code will not apply. The next point is paragraph B in that section, new lots. Removal of over 25% of canopy tree on new lots. Well, this is not a new lot. This is an existing lot. So I'm not sure if those regulations would apply. Continuing, there is a provision that says to tag trees to remain or to be removed, and that this is to be coordinated with the township. The proof of minimizing vegetation removing will be needed following a challenge of the township. This assumes that the township possesses knowledge when to challenge and can act prior to removal of the trees. In our case, the trees were removed. We lost an acre plus of woodlands, and then the township stepped in to stop the tree cutting.
All right, Mr. Prozek, do you have much more to cover?
No, but I have one other point that's not related to tree removal, if I may.
Go ahead, finish it up.
The proposed code, my final point is on keeping farm animals on single-family residential lots. The proposed codes requires 3 acres for building a horse stable on a property and requires a 25-foot setback from any property line. That's Section 2103A, Ancillary Uses, Use A-22.8. Horse stable may not be closer than 25 feet to any property line. My comment is, it makes sense to also look at setbacks from residences. If a house can be as close as 40 feet to a side yard property line, and a horse stable on the neighbor's side is allowed to be built 25 feet from that property line, then the total distance is 65 feet between a home where people live and a stable where farm animals are kept. The proposal is to figure in the setbacks from residences and not just property lines. And it seems that that would be fair simply because you're requiring 3 acres to put in a stable, but yet the stable can be so close to another residence that it sort of throws the 3-acre requirement up in the air. You have so much land, but yet you put the stable so close to a neighbor's house. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, sir. And hopefully you'll make note of those comments you brought up.
Mr. President, can I just quickly comment on that?
You want to shift gears back
I
to the
just got
other?
a quick question so I can leave.
Your name? Okay.
Dale Jonas, 2448 Radcliffe Ave in Roslyn. 2448. Radcliffe Avenue, Roslyn. Gotcha. I am also the chief of the Roslyn Fire Company. Good evening, Commissioners. Some of you I know, some of you I don't know. I'm going to be very brief and to the point. I would like to get back to the non-combustible thing. I would like to go home tonight so I can, myself and my other gentlemen back here, can prepare for tomorrow's storm to protect our citizens. So are we going to look into the non-combustible code? I mean, because I would like to go home and peaceful tonight and know that my commissioners are looking out for not only myself and our residents.
Well, we just had a last comment from the public, and we would get ready to shift back to Commissioner
Well, that-
Spiegelman, who's going to bring that point back up right now.
Okay.
So why don't you just sit tight, maybe we'll have an answer to your question.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
You're very welcome, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. President, actually,
Yes, sir.
Chief Jonas's comment actually pertains to what I was going to say anyway. I actually also have something about regarding Mr. Prosick said, but obviously, first things first. I think, I mean, just I know, speaking from my perspective, absolutely this is going to be pursued, and I think, for the record, let there be no confusion to anyone watching or anyone present. There is not a single person here, or frankly in our audience, that does not value and cherish the service and value the lives and safety of every one of our every single firefighter on our all volunteer fire department, all 5 companies. And so I let that not be a question. I think there's some specifics that have to be hammered out about what the procedure is, but that doesn't sound like something that needs to take any appreciable time at all. This is not something that's going to, as I said, go on a shelf or just be backburnered. I think this is something we can move forward with all appropriate speed.
Well, let's take it one step further.
Okay.
In exactly what you're saying. Could we please give the directive to the solicitor to prepare whatever documents and then have it reviewed by the fire marshal's office to go to labor and industry? You're talking, once it's at labor and industry for months, right, yeah. I understand. I know, I worked in state government.
I can only speak for myself.
Right. But we certainly, once this part of the process is done, we could certainly consult with our state representative and our state senator to help move it through. And I know that they have the power to do that.
And make sure it doesn't get,
Exactly.
Right. I'm just going to
So those folks can leave here tonight knowing that we've done that. Mr. President, would you give the directive to our solicitor for that?
I think
I have a
Commissioner
quick
Chavez
question,
get ready to do that
So,
right now. Go ahead.
I think what I heard you saying is that you prepare something, which I think we're about to ask you to do, and then it comes back to us for a vote? Is that what you said has to happen?
We would want to present the draft ordinance to the code committee and then the board as a whole to understand what the ordinance is, and then we would be directed to forward that on to L&I.
Okay, so it has to come to us to a vote. before?
It's going to be, because
So-
we're going to send it up to L and I.
I'm just trying to look at time frame. So is that something that can be done for the next
Committee meeting.
subcommittee,
Today's
public
the
safety, and then,
13th?
yeah, okay.
Yeah, I don't know.
As Director of Public Safety,
Yeah.
you'd be
So
be
I do
honest?
agree to that as the Director of Public Safety, that it could go on to our next agenda.
Certainly.
Thank you.
And I'll
question on
I'll
that?
circulate a copy of the draft.
So as Director of Public Safety, you're making that request?
Yes,
Okay. Thank you.
Request so made, I'll
Yes.
forward that around.
Okay.
Sir.
Do we need to vote on that?
You do not.
Thank you. Sir?
Mike Jones, 1146 Huntington Road in Abington, and I'm also the fire chief at Abington. And it's not a draft ordinance. We want to send our ordinance to L&I and have respect for our 5 fire chiefs we had in the 60s and 70s that went through enormous hoops to get this ordinance, to make sure that it gets the due process, that our fire marshal's office, the 5 fire chiefs, have a chance to defend the ordinance to L&I and say why we would like it to stay there. But I don't believe it's a draft ordinance. I believe it is an ordinance that's already in place. Thank you.
It's certainly a draft ordinance.
You're saying the existing ordinance? Mike, you're saying the existing
This
ordinance?
is an ordinance that's been enforced by the fire marshal's office since the early 70s. So I don't think it's a draft we're sending to them.
That's the existing.
It's an existing ordinance, is how I have understood it since I've been in the fire service for 30 years.
It is an existing ordinance that is on the township's books, but the township would be required to pass a new ordinance, which would require the drafting of an ordinance in order to maintain that standard.
But it would be the same.
The language is going to
The same.
So it's
the
a matter-
language is going to be
Not being gutted or altered in any way.
correct.
Yes, just numbered differently,
It's going to be
basically.
a copy and paste.
So there's
Having a
no,
renewed ordinance which would supersede the
Correct.
previous.
one other point, there's no immediate risk other than the ordinance itself is illegal as it stands now or improper.
The current ordinance is in limbo right now, correct?
Right, but other than that, it's not like we've repealed anything, I mean, we've not even taken any action. Okay. I wanted
And
to
from
make
what I
that-
understand, up through today, developers that have come into the township have complied with the ordinance at the request or the request of the township or voluntarily. So I don't think that there's any building in the township that has been constructed inconsistent with that ordinance since the 70s.
Thank you.
Including right now.
As far as I know, through
Okay.
today, correct.
Thank you, Mr. Solicitor.
Can I say one more thing?
Sir?
My name is Kenneth Clark, C-L-A-R-K. If the solicitor is right, you realize there's hundreds of municipalities in Pennsylvania that have more stringent codes than the International Fire Code. Upper Dublin, you build a house, it's got to be sprinklered. There's no state code that says you have to sprinkle a new residence. Doesn't exist in Pennsylvania. Upper Dublin had an ordinance pre-existing, just like our pre-existing ordinance on non-combustible. So if our solicitor is right, now all of a sudden, and it's a Schuylkill County decision specific to sprinklers. They made a decision in Schuylkill County, or Schuylkill Township, to require sprinkler in all new construction and retroactively forcing people to sprinkle homes. And that went to court, and it was specific to that request by Schuylkill Township. But think about it. If what she's saying is correct, all these municipalities that have fire codes or fire-related codes that are more severe, more stringent than the International Fire Code, then they can't enforce their codes. That's what they're saying.
And with all due respect to the fire marshal, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that this code in this township, L&I has no record of that specific exception or that specific requirement being approved.
Well, I don't think that L&I was that interested in our fire codes, because the solicitor's office at one point made a statement that in order for our Chapter 85 to be in effect, it had to go to L&I. The first submittal that he made, Larry Mateo, included the entire Chapter 85. The guy at the state looked at it and says, oh, no, we don't want all that, because the state is not in the business of enforcing a fire code, just a building code. And they prescribed that you only need this and this to approve all your ordinances. And they took it back and rewrote it, and they took out all of Chapter 85. So, I mean, we're chasing our tails here. That's why I'm saying, that's why I asked about a second opinion. Look, if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But I think the solicitor maybe has it wrong.
And again, with all due respect to the fire marshal, this is crystal clear in our review of the relevant case law. Again, it's a matter of submitting it to L&I and determining what L&I will do with it.
Okay?
Okay, well, we'll leave it at that, and you have direction to move forward
I
on
do.
that. And we'll see what happens.
So, can I answer the last gentleman's questions?
The last gentleman.
Yeah,
okay,
trees.
Yes, he had a whole
On Old
host
Ford?
of questions. Right.
On Old Ford?
Go ahead.
So, in looking with Mike, we went through, the steep slope ordinance does have a different definition for site disturbance than the definition section. We're going to alter that, so site disturbance does include tree removal. And we'll alter the landscape section so that it includes site disturbance as part of the square footage calculation. If they have site disturbance of, instead of just impervious or adding, or if they disturb, we'll also add site disturbance in there. So that'll be added to the landscape section.
That's Mr. Prusik, right? Is that the correct one? Okay, good. Good question, sir. Thank you.
Mr. President, is that going to be for steep slope only?
No.
That's what it is now.
It's, right now it covers steep slope, but it'll be in the existing lot section of the landscape.
Well, I guess that takes me to a basic question. Do you have the right, does government have the right to tell a property owner that he can't take the trees off of his property if it's not on any steep slope or anything?
Well, let me rephrase what I said before. We can make that change if it's up, I mean, it would have to be something up to the board if that's something that you would like us to make a change for.
Well,
originally, we had a much more, and I'd have to go back and find what the original draft looked like, but we had a lot more contingency. We had a lot more things involved in the landscape section, and that was taken out during the review of the Planning Commission and the Board of Commissioners back in 2015, for various reasons, not just the reason that Commissioner Bowman had talked about. So, but we can add that in if chose to do so.
I would just ask, maybe, it sounds like something that a court must have ruled on. I would think it's got to be a legal question. If you have the right to restrict tree removal of a property, I would tend to doubt it, but I don't know. Have you guys examined that question?
Let me just have Mr. Prosak close out by asking one final question. Go ahead, sir.
Well, I just want to bring to your attention that in the case that we're facing, it's not the removal of a tree, but it's removal of dozens and dozens of trees that have been growing for 50, 60, 70, 80 years. Some are of a caliper size of 40-inch plus, and these are oaks, and so they're slow growers. And it's a question for the township. If we allow property owners to do as they please, we can be a township without any trees soon. And there are no protections. And I think the Board of Commissioners should look into finding that balance in recognizing property rights, but also protections for the common weal. Because that's why we're a civil association, or a civil society, and live together.
Thank you. Stevens, you have a comment regarding, hold on, please. Nathan?
Just that if you think we're going to go past like the 2.5, 3 hour mark, if we can take like a 2-minute break so I can...
I don't think we are. No, I'd like to wrap it up now. Come on, Ms. Stevens. Thank you.
Rita Stevens, 115 Stanley Avenue. Just to reiterate a comment that I made earlier, that representing the Shade Tree Commission, that I think is pertinent to this issue is, I think that we need to look at this land preservation district overlay, and particularly look at the preservation of natural features, which include woodland areas. And I think that this is the space where, combined with the landscape, that we can resolve this issue for a natural feature.
Yeah, the Land Preservation Overlay District deals with larger properties in R1 districts. I don't think that would handle what they're talking about. Is it 10 acres? Yeah, but the Land Preservation District centers around the ability to, or the incentive for the property owner to preserve a certain portion of the land, and they would get greater density on a smaller portion of the land. That's the idea of the land preservation. What they're talking about on Old Ford is a single property owner, not necessarily subdividing, just clear cutting their property. But the landscape section is something we should look at if the board were desiring that.
Otherwise, this whole...
You would have to come up here.
Hold on. Come up to the podium, ma'am. Just give briefly, give your name and address and briefly comment on Ms.
Lydia
Stevens.
Procyk, 1265 Old Ford Road, and Procyk. And all I just wanted to comment is that in case we're not going to adopt any more stringent rules about trees, then this whole preamble to the landscaping section of this new revised zone is just a travesty. It has very beautiful language, but then there's just no meat in it.
Okay, thank you. All right, are there any other comments from residents?
Mr. President, before we get off that one tree issue, I just wanted to address, I know people might be curious about the sort of unusual length of time of Mr. Prosyk's comment. This whole thing actually pertains to a situation that Mr. and Mrs. Procyk brought to a recent Shade Tree Commission meeting. So it's sort of there's sort of a continuing issue. I know it was sort of unusual, but it's sort of an ongoing thing. And I know Shade Tree has been looking into, and I know there was a big conversation about that. So.
Thank you, sir. Name and address, please.
Laura Lehman, 1431 Bryant Lane. So I have a couple of... Yes, Lehmann. I have a couple of things. So first of all, can I ask when this version that you're presenting tonight was finished? How long ago that was finished?
I don't quite get when it was finished or when it's going to be
October, November? Around October of 2016.
Okay.
So when I have been asking at the podium for a summary of the things, this could not have been offered, or?
Well, it seems like it was very in-depth and very...
Yeah, I think we addressed this at the Board of Commissioner meeting, I guess, whenever it was, a week or so ago. There is no way to produce a one-page or a two-page summary of the changes. When we went through this process back in 2015, we had, as we showed in the slideshow, we had about 6 Planning Commission meetings and Board of Commissioners meeting. We had, and those included extensive PowerPoint presentations that went through all the changes, map changes,
I interrupt for
language
1 second.
changes.
Let me interrupt for
and
1 second,
Those changes were extensively vetted.
Go ahead.
Those changes were extensively vetted, and that's what led to the recommendation list that was passed on by the Planning Commission to the Board of Commissioners, and subsequently the Board of Commissioners to the Zoning Ordinance Committee. I have no way of producing, other than to go back and have somebody review the slideshows, presentations, and the video of an in-depth or a summary of what has changed.
You just produced one tonight, and that one was available, and I've been asking for one, and a variety of people would have been glad to have that in advance of this meeting rather than at the meeting in order to look up
That's
some
a 5-page
more deeply
list
some
from
of the things.
the changes from the last go-round. That's not a 1-page summary. You can't have the last draft. That's a...
If you had a 5-page summary?
But that's a change from the very last draft. It's not just a 5-page summary of the entire realm of changes in the zoning code. What you're asking for is just a ridiculous impossibility. belies a misunderstanding of zoning from top to bottom.
What
There
we
can't
were-
be one set of important changes. If a lot of things change, what's important to one person might be not important to another, or what's not important to one person may be very well important to another. If it-
That's
so you've-
exactly why you need a summary, because there
Well,
were
just read the
so
code.
many
Ms. Lehman,
hours.
okay.
So let me just
End
say
the-
that
end the
that...
conversation.
So
Next
that's
question.
the first issue here,
Next.
okay? And that, and the fact that today, on the website, before this meeting, the particular, the things that appeared didn't even include the one PowerPoint summary, that's somewhat useless anyhow, but it didn't even include the one thing that was a summary, nor did it include a link to the actual draft that we currently are using, so that you could go in and look at political signs and find out where did that finally land after the hours and hours and hours. What we were offered instead on the site was the hours and hours and hours of video. That's the thing that needs to change to engage people in this township. And while some people understand what their issues are and how they are affected, maybe they only understand them because they just had an incident and they went and looked up the law. But many people are going to be affected by this, and their engagement brings the knowledge and the experience that, for instance, this speaker had. So it's extremely important to get the people in this township engaged in processes this important.
Okay.
So that's number one. Number two, the issues of pulling things closer to the street. I'm just going to go down some of the things that were mentioned. I can't tell you enough how bad that is. If you look at Jenkintown, you can't even see what the shops are. You're looking at your car. If I drive past the Abington Shopping Center, when I glance across, I can see all the shops. So set back from the street actually enables you to see the shops better, number one. Number two, it gives you more viability for increasing a road width if you need it. If later on, as you're increasing the density in this township, you actually need to increase roads, you have some options. And while I understand you may not be able to take that land by eminent domain, you may be able to make a deal and buy some of it. Okay,
keep moving.
bonuses were mentioned again in here. If the Baderwood doesn't show us how bad bonuses is, I don't know what does, because I don't know what the Baderwood possibly could have already done that they thought now they earned 244 units over there instead of 80 or whatever it might have otherwise been. And I think almost everybody in Abington would look at those 244 units and say, what we need is bonuses, not to have 244 units.
Okay, next
instead
on your
of that
list.
as a bonus.
Next.
Okay, your signs, the billboards, for instance. What I'm concerned, you mentioned when you were talking about them that these Bartkowski ones that have been in waiting are not going to now fit automatically into the sign ordinance. Can he amend them briefly and now fit them in? Do we know?
No.
In other words, just by size or something?
No, the 5 properties that were identified are not even close to a half acre in size, no less 10 acres.
Okay, all right, very good. And then the 500 feet minimum with the bars, and we were going to allow more. Somebody testified just recently at a meeting of all the bars in a row that there are down, for instance, from Rockledge all the way up Huntington Pike. Is there a limit anywhere in there that when we have so and so many, we don't, or we just are allowing them to be close to each other and as many as possible?
My turn again?
Go ahead.
The only limitation that's in place on facilities of that nature are the liquor license transfers that we see that come in front of the Board of Commissioners. Now, again, that does not take into consideration an establishment that's able to purchase a liquor license from an existing establishment within Abington. So, but not that we're trying to create Delaware Avenue here in Abington, but,
Limited to BC on Huntington Pike.
correct.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Mr. Narcosh.
So she mentioned Huntington Pike.
Right.
She mentioned Huntington Pike specifically. On Huntington Pike, it would be limited to only the business center districts. So, obviously, as you went to the north, you'd hit residential districts, and there would be no bars permitted.
Okay, so I would ask just if you would look at that again and see if anywhere along there, and I'll look at it when I get a link to the actual ordinance. I'll look at it and see too, but if you'd look at it again and make sure that that can't be an issue, that we get so many in one place.
Okay.
The fracking thing, I did get some answers on that. I actually forgot some of what was said, but my concern was that our fracking, and I haven't seen, because I don't have the link, I haven't seen how it came out finally, but my concern is we have a wastewater treatment plant, and the way the fracking was worded, if I recall, was fracking activities. So treating fracking wastewater would be fracking activities. I'd like you to look into that closely, and please make sure that that is not going to be the case, because I think it's mostly Upper Dublin that's downstream, but that would be a disaster. Another thing is the political temporary signs.
Right.
I am completely opposed to that. I guess we're going to have to see how that shakes out. I understand you saying that, legally we can't do anything about it, but legally it is us and our fellow communities that make the laws. And if the state is telling us we can't do something that everybody wants to do, then it's incumbent upon us to join together with Cheltenham, Upper Dublin, and everybody else who doesn't want that, and to change it.
Okay.
Native plantings, I hope we would actually have in there somewhere something about native plantings. I am with Commissioner Bowman on the thing with the trees, and I'm not talking about clear-cutting hundreds of trees, but in my own property, for instance, the large trees are threatening my house. And so I wouldn't plant large trees again in order to not be in that situation. So I am also opposed to the township telling me what trees I can and can't plant and how many calipers they need to be.
Okay, do you have anything else, Ms. Lehman?
Except for clear cutting. Yes, I have one or two more. If we don't have something about foul language, do we, on the free speech signs? Do we have anything about foul language? Is there any limit at all?
I haven't heard anything regarding that, no? Next.
So could we look into that, please?
Next.
Okay, because if you buy a house, obviously that is going to, it's affecting your children, it's going to affect your house value, and it will affect your quality of life in every way. And the LED signs on the billboards.
Thank you.
What is the status of the LED sign, the LED lights, rather,
They
on the
did make
billboards?
mention of that earlier.
What is that status?
100% of the billboard as an... You can have up to 100% of the billboard as a digital or LED sign.
Of a billboard? A giant billboard? And we're really allowing that in Abington, as dense as we are, and as much as no matter where you're going to put it, it's going to be in view of residential?
There are additional requirements. The copy can only change a certain amount of times per minute, and it also has a certain amount of foot candles, light that it can put out, so that the light disperses as it gets out to the property line.
Is that a requisite from the state, or is that Abington that's allowing that?
The requirement for a billboard is a requirement of the MPC. We have to provide for the use. The limitations on the foot candle, the size, the setback, the number of times copy can change in any given minute, where a conglomeration of all the different meetings we had and the vetting processes we went through the Planning Commission and a review of, at this case, I don't know, Larry, what do you think, 25 zoning hearing board applications dealing with LED signs.
So that's Abington that's choosing to allow LED signs and the changes.
That's not what I said. I said
Okay.
the requirement for the use is the direct requirement of the MPC. The standards for the use, as far as where it goes and how bright it is and how big it is Abington Township.
So the billboard must be allowed, but Abington Township is saying, yes, we're going to allow you LED lights on 100% of that surface.
Sure.
Okay. I am completely opposed to that. I'm going to bet 54,000 of the 56,000 residents that aren't owning billboards are also going to be
Thank you.
opposed. Thank you.
Any other comments from the public?
Mr. President?
Sir.
Just a super quick clarification, because I think that a lot of people actually might be legitimately confused by that last exchange. The MPC, Municipal Planning Code, says that basically billboards are something that has to be allowed. A township can't write an ordinance that says no billboards allowed. It's up to us. It's up to the township to define what the restrictions are. And I think that Mr. Penical and Mr. Klein, Mr. Narkowicz have been, and everyone else have set up the most restrictions that would be allowable. But if you create so many restrictions that there's no place in the township that you could actually put up a billboard, then someone who wants to put up a billboard can sue us and win, and then put up a billboard. So in doing their due diligence, they're trying to make it as restrictive as possible, as far as setbacks, as far as foot candles. But we can't. And please, any one of these gentlemen can correct me if I'm wrong in just trying to put this in plain speech. But we can't pass an ordinance that says no billboards. We can't pass an ordinance that says no LED billboards. All we can do is be as restrictive as possible so that we don't have 1 million billboards. But if we cross the line and put all the restrictions and then there's no place to have any billboards, we get sued and we end up with billboards.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Is that
Feeney.
about right?
No. Ms. Lehman, no, not right now. I'm going to let this gentleman was waiting patiently while you spoke. Please sit down. Sir? No, you had your chance, Mrs. Lehman. Thank you, sir. Your name and address for the record.
First, before I make my comment, I'd just like to say that I hope that we can do everything.
I need your name first.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's Joe Massey.
Can you spell that?
MASSI, 1244 Old Ford Road, Huntington Valley in Abington, Ward 2. And before I make my comments about the ordinance, I just hope that the commissioners can do everything and anything they can to keep our fire department personnel safe. Because when the alarm goes off, we all run the other way. They run into the fire. I have one question. On the new ordinance, if a landowner wants to take down a tree, does he need a permit?
No,
They don't need a permit.
they do not.
Okay. Currently, they don't need a permit under the old ordinance, under
That's
the current
correct.
ordinance, right?
They do not need a permit under the current ordinance.
And in the new ordinance, they will not need a permit.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So you've already had a chance. I think the gentleman behind you hasn't spoken yet. Did you have your hand up, sir, behind you? Okay. Could you make it brief so we can close the hearing? Thank you.
Your name first, sir?
Sure. My name is Neil Gale. It's Nealgale. Live at 2214 Jenkintown Road. And I had sort of a procedural question. So down the road, if somebody wants to do something that is against this code, is there a standard variance procedure? I didn't read into it. I don't know. I apologize.
Yes, they're standard across the board from the state. Here in Abington, it's a zoning hearing board process. You would file a zoning hearing board application for relief of whatever section it is that you're running in conflict with code. The zoning hearing board meets monthly. You present your application. They render a decision. The process takes about 90 days.
Okay, that's good. And another question on top of that. If there are generalized changes, I've just gotten involved in the EAC here in Township last week, the first meeting, and I have raised my hand and volunteered to kind of spearhead greenhouse gas emission reductions in the Township, because that kind of fell apart when CACI kind of moved away from that. If there are issues that come up in that process that are conflicting with what
ends up being the new code, is there a way to revise the code? Or how often can it be changed, I guess is the question.
Our code, there's not a limit, to be very honest with you. You're not limited to 2 amendments, 3 amendments a year.
Okay.
Laws change regularly.
Okay.
Science changes on a regular basis.
Right.
We adjust the code as we see fit.
Perfect. Thanks very much.
Thank you, sir. All right, one last question, sir. Could you make it brief, please?
Yes.
Thank you.
I believe that for, my name, Roman Procyk, P-R-O-C-Y-K. I believe that for public trees in a public right-of-way, the township has to give permission to have it cut down. I don't know if that is a permit, but I believe there is or at least in the version that I saw.
The only time that I'm aware the township needs to be involved in trees removed from a public right-of-way, if those trees were installed as part of an economic overlay development. The street trees that were put in Roslyn, Keswick, Jenkintown Road, Township Line Road. Those trees, as they need to be, correct. They were trees that were put in as part of a plan.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Pennicow, and thank you, staff. Thank you, Mr. Knucklewish. Thank you, Vice President Klein. Thank you, Lauren Gallagher. And thank you, Board of Commissioners, and thank you, public. And you have a closing statement?
Yeah, before we close, Mark had sent out a list of dates for a continuation of this hearing and continuation of the examination of this ordinance, and that date is April 27th.
April 27th.
7 o'clock.
So 7 o'clock start time. Of the commissioners that responded, we had one conflict. That's a Monday evening.
And that is subject to discussions with the solicitor as far as advertising.
I'm sorry. 27th is
of April, right?
It is. But I just said it was a Monday. I'm told that's not true.
No, it's a Monday in March. It's the 27th.
So which
Hold on a
date is
minute.
it?
It's a Thursday evening.
It's a Thursday evening.
And that would be the right one, Thursday, the 27th?
Thursday the 27th.
April 27th, 7 o'clock in this room.
And that is, like I said, subject to going through with the solicitor the advertising requirements for the continuation. So if there's something that comes up in conversations with them that makes that change, that'll be announced also.
Okay. All right. Is that it?
I think that's it.
Okay. At this point, I'll close the hearing. Thank you all for attending, and thank you very much.